I don't usually pay attention to other people's lives. I clock in, do the work I'm supposed to, keep my head down. But ever since I met her, I can't seem to stop replaying the moment in my head, like a splinter I can't pull out. The story's title might sound like it belongs to her, not me. I took my husband for granted, until he disappeared forever. That's what I overheard her say once, on the phone, her voice breaking just enough to give away the part she didn't want anyone else to hear. But for me, the title marks the start of something else. The first time I realized how a single glance, a pause too long, can rearrange the air around two people. It happened in the most ordinary place, a car repair shop. I've worked there 3 years, mostly handling oil changes and paperwork while my uncle runs the harder jobs. Grease-stained walls, the hum of fluorescent lights, a coffee machine that spits out bitter sludge. Nothing about it feels special. But that morning, when she walked in, the shop suddenly felt too small. She wasn't flashy about it. No loud clothes, no perfume cloud following her. She carried herself like someone used to being looked at but tired of it, shoulders pulled back, chin steady, eyes scanning the room as though she'd already measured the distance between herself and everyone else. Mid-40s, maybe older, I couldn't be sure. Her hair was pulled back in a way that made her look both put together and slightly distracted, like she had better things to think about than appearances. Her car needed a new alternator. She spoke to my uncle first, her tone even, her words precise, but not unkind. Then, when he got called to the back for a part, it was just the two of us at the counter. I tried to type in her information without fumbling the keys, but the silence pressed heavier than I expected. "You don't have to rush," she said, voice low calm. I nodded, though I wasn't rushing. My fingers froze anyway. When I looked up, she was watching me, not impatient, not judging, just watching. A glance that held too long, like she was trying to decide if I reminded her of someone. I must have looked awkward because she smiled, barely, and shifted her weight, crossing her arms. It wasn't a big smile. It wasn't meant to be, but I felt it in my chest. There was a pause. I thought about asking her if she wanted coffee, even though the stuff here tastes like burnt cardboard. But before I could speak, she leaned slightly closer to the counter and said, "Do you like working here?" The question threw me. Nobody asks that. Customers either complain or keep quiet. I opened my mouth, then closed it, then said, "Most days." Her eyebrow lifted, amused. Honest answer. She didn't press further. She just held my gaze for one more moment than necessary before taking a step back. The kind of moment you tell yourself not to read into, but your body betrays you anyway. When my uncle returned, she slipped easily back into her role, efficient, cordial, unbothered. The spell broke, like nothing had passed between us. But I couldn't stop glancing at her reflection in the shop window, the way she tapped her fingers against her folder, the way her eyes lingered on something invisible outside. By the time she left, keys jingling in her hand, I had no reason to feel anything, no reason to remember. And yet, I can still see the faint curve of her smile, the weight of that unasked question, and the silence that stretched just a little too long between us. It was nothing, and somehow, it was everything. She came back a week later. Most customers don't return so soon unless something's wrong. But this time, she wasn't here for her car. "I left some papers in the glove compartment," she said, standing just inside the shop's doorway like she wasn't sure she wanted to step farther in. The place was noisy, air compressors hissing, a wrench clattering to the ground. But somehow her presence carved out its own quiet. I offered to get the papers for her. She hesitated before handing me the keys, like even that small act meant giving up control. Her car was parked at the far end of the lot. Inside, the papers were neatly clipped together, just as she'd said. But what caught my eye wasn't the documents. It was a scarf crumpled on the passenger seat, soft and worn, the kind someone forgets but always goes back for. A flash of her life, folded into fabric. When I walked back, she was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, gaze somewhere above the calendar on the wall. She looked different in stillness, shoulders lowered, the mask of confidence slipping. Up close, I noticed faint lines beneath her eyes, the kind exhaustion leaves when it becomes a regular guest. "Here," I said, handing over the papers. She reached out, and for a split second her fingers brushed mine. Cool skin, steady grip. But the way she pulled back too quickly told me she hadn't meant for that to happen. "Thank you," she said, softer than before. The silence stretched again. I couldn't stop noticing small things. How carefully she gathered the papers against her chest. The way she pressed her lips together like they might betray more than she wanted to say. How her hand lingered on the edge of the counter before letting go. "You must be busy," I offered, just to cut through the weight in the air. Her eyes flicked to me, unreadable. "Always." Then, after a pause, quieter. "Too busy." It was nothing more than 2 words, but the way her voice broke on the second made me want to ask questions I had no right to ask. She caught herself then, straightening, sliding the mask back on. A practiced smile, polite enough to close any door she might have cracked open. "Anyway, I should go." I nodded, though part of me wanted to stop her, to keep her in that fragile version of herself just a little longer. As she turned to leave, her scarf slipped from the papers and fell to the floor. I bent quickly, scooping it up. The fabric was warm in my hands, carrying the faint scent of rain and something floral I couldn't place. When I held it out to her, she met my eyes. Just for a second, long enough for me to see the tiredness there, the weight she carried, and something else. Something unspoken that pressed against my chest like a secret I wasn't meant to know. She took the scarf, her fingers grazing mine again. This time, she didn't pull away so quickly. And that was the moment I couldn't stop thinking about. It was late when she came by again. The shop had already closed, the storm outside rattling the loose metal siding like a warning. I'd stayed behind to finish paperwork, but when her headlights swept across the windows, my chest tightened. She stepped in carrying the same calm poise she always wore, though her coat was wet at the shoulders. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't realize it was so late. My car was making a noise again." I told her it was fine, that I could take a quick look. The truth was, I would have stayed all night if it meant she wouldn't turn and walk back out into that rain. While I checked under the hood, she lingered close, arms folded tight against the chill. The rain pounded so hard on the roof it drowned out the hum of my tools, leaving only the sound of her quiet breathing behind me. "It's strange," she said after a moment, her voice almost lost in the storm. "How some places feel safer than home." I glanced up, but she was staring past me into the dark. Her words weren't really meant for me, but I heard them anyway. I wanted to ask her what she meant. Instead, I tightened a bolt that didn't need tightening and muttered, "Doesn't sound strange at all." The silence stretched, heavy with things neither of us wanted to put into words. When I finished, I wiped my hands on a rag. She was closer now, too close, standing just beside me. I could smell the faint trace of her perfume mixed with rain, could see the damp strands of hair clinging to her cheek. She looked younger like that, undone in a way she didn't usually allow. "I don't usually bother people with my problems," she said suddenly, almost defensive. Then, softer, "It doesn't really matter anymore." I didn't move. Maybe it does. Her eyes met mine then, a flicker of something raw and unguarded passing through them. For a second, the air between us tightened, the storm outside hammering against the thin walls like it was urging us closer. But before either of us spoke again, her phone buzzed. The sound cut through everything. She fumbled to silence it, her hand trembling just slightly as she shoved it back into her coat pocket. The screen had lit long enough for me to catch a name. Daniel. Her jaw tightened. She forced a smile, too quick, too practiced. "Thank you for looking at the car." "I should." She stopped, breath catching, as if the words stuck in her throat. Her hand brushed against mine when she reached for the rag, lingering half a heartbeat too long. I almost said her name. I almost asked her not to leave. But I didn't. The storm roared, the lights flickered, and she stepped back, drawing the distance between us again. "Good night," she whispered, though her voice sounded like she wasn't sure she meant it. And then she was gone, leaving me with the weight of everything we hadn't said. The next time I saw her, it wasn't planned. She came by just as we were shutting down, the sun barely hanging above the rooftops. My uncle had already left, leaving the place quieter than usual. She stood by the counter, hands resting on a folder she didn't seem interested in opening. We talked about her car at first, just the basics. But the way she lingered told me neither of us cared about spark plugs or service intervals. The silence grew heavy, pressing in on us until it felt almost physical. She tapped her fingers against the folder, then stopped, as if she realized I was listening too closely to the sound. Finally, she broke it. "This isn't normal," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her, too bright, too watchful. I swallowed. "What isn't?" She gave me a look that cut past the question, past the dodge. "You know." My chest tightened. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Her words had cracked something open, and the air between us was different now. Charged, fragile, impossible to patch back up. I tried to find the right words. Failed. "Maybe it's nothing." Her lips pressed into a faint, humorless smile. "Nothing doesn't keep people awake at night." The honesty in that sentence startled me. She'd said too much, and I knew it. Her gaze dropped to the counter, and in the pause that followed, I heard the clock ticking, the hum of the refrigerator in the back, the whole shop breathing around us. I leaned on the counter, closer than I should have. "So what are we doing?" Her eyes flicked up, sharp and searching. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she exhaled slowly, as though she'd been holding her breath for weeks. "I don't know," she whispered. There was a long silence after that. Not the easy kind, not the kind that lets you rest. This one sat between us like a question neither of us could bear to answer. Her hand rested on the folder, unmoving. Mine was on the counter, inches away. The space between them felt unbearable. I thought about closing it. I didn't. She finally looked at me, and in her eyes I saw regret, exhaustion, and something else, something dangerous. "You remind me," she said softly, "of everything I thought I had time for, and didn't." The words landed like a confession and a wound all at once. I wanted to ask what she meant, who she was thinking of, whether it was her husband, or me, or something bigger than both of us. But the look on her face stopped me. She straightened, pulling herself back into that composed version of herself, the one she showed the world. But the tremor in her voice lingered as she added, almost to herself, "I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending this doesn't matter." And then she fell silent, leaving me with a truth neither of us knew how to hold. She came in on a Wednesday, late afternoon, when the sun was already low enough to stain the floor with orange light. Her car didn't need service, at least, not really. She carried herself differently that day, slower, as if every step cost her effort. "I shouldn't be here," she said before I could even greet her. Not harsh, not accusing, just weary. I didn't argue. I only nodded, waiting. She set her purse on the counter and leaned against it, her fingers tracing the zipper like it gave her something to hold on to. For the first time, she wasn't perfectly composed. The steadiness I'd grown used to was gone. "I had a son," she said, almost abruptly. "Older than you. He would have been 24 this year." The words landed like a quiet blow. She didn't look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on a calendar tacked crooked on the wall, as if reading dates that weren't really there. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know if I had the right to say anything. She went on, her voice thin but steady. "He died in a car accident. 3 years ago. My husband. He never forgave me for moving on at all. And maybe I didn't. Maybe I just learned how to act like I had." Her hand slipped off the purse and curled into her palm. I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers, the way she clenched them as though holding back something bigger. I should have stepped back, given her the space she clearly needed. But instead, I found myself whispering, "I'm sorry." Her eyes flicked to mine then, sharp, wet, unguarded. "Don't be. You didn't know him." The silence after that was unbearable. She shifted her weight, her voice quiet but heavy. "Sometimes, when you talk, when you look at me the way you do, I catch myself thinking he might have grown into someone like you." My throat tightened. The thought lodged inside me, strange and aching. I wasn't sure if I felt honored, guilty, or something I didn't even have a name for. The light outside dimmed further, the shop sinking into shadows. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, each second stretching longer than it should. Her hand moved toward her purse again, but not before brushing lightly against mine on the counter. Neither of us pulled away. The contact was almost nothing, skin against skin for less than a breath. but it burned into me. She finally withdrew, picking up her purse, straightening her shoulders, putting the mask back on. But her voice betrayed her when she said, almost like a confession she couldn't take back, "I don't know if I see you, or if I just see who I lost." Then she turned, leaving me with the weight of a revelation I hadn't been ready to hear. Something that shifted the ground beneath everything we'd been pretending was ordinary. She didn't come by for almost 2 weeks. I tried to tell myself it was for the best, that maybe the silence would close the distance we kept crossing. But each day without her felt longer, as though the absence had a sound of its own. When she finally appeared, it wasn't planned. I was sweeping the shop floor near closing, the broom scratching over concrete, when the bell above the door chimed. She stepped in, not carrying folders or excuses this time. No car keys, no mask of purpose. Just herself, looking tired, her hair loose around her shoulders, her coat still damp from a drizzle outside. "I didn't know where else to go," she said quietly. I leaned the broom against the wall, suddenly aware of the space between us and how much it had weighed on me. "You don't need a reason," I told her, and it was the truest thing I'd ever said. We didn't talk much after that. I made us coffee, though it was bitter and lukewarm, and she accepted it without complaint. We sat at the counter, side by side, the quiet filling in where words couldn't reach. She traced the rim of her mug with one finger, staring into the steam. "I can't keep pretending," she said at last. Not looking at me, not asking for a response, just laying it out like a truth too heavy to keep carrying. I didn't answer right away. I watched the way her hand trembled slightly before she pulled it back, folding it into her lap as though even that gesture had said too much. Finally, I whispered, "Neither can I." The silence that followed wasn't sharp this time. It was soft, like something breaking open without shattering. She turned her head, and our eyes met. No speeches, no grand confessions, just the raw acknowledgement of what had been there all along. Her hand moved, hesitant, until it rested on the counter, inches from mine. I let mine drift closer, not rushing, not forcing, until our fingers touched. She didn't pull away. She let the contact stay, steady and grounding, like we'd both been holding our breath for weeks and could finally exhale. We stayed like that, hands barely joined, shoulders almost brushing. The storm outside had quieted to a gentle patter, a rhythm that filled the room without intruding. She leaned her forehead against her hand, and in that small tilt toward me, I felt everything unspoken: grief, longing, guilt, the fragile beginning of something we couldn't name but both understood. No one said love. No one had to. We simply sat there, side by side, in the quiet collapse of all the pretending, until the moment became its own answer. And for the first time, silence didn't feel like distance. It felt like home. I think about that night more often than I admit. Not because anything dramatic happened. No confessions, no sweeping gestures, nothing that would fit neatly into the kind of story people like to tell. What happened was quieter. And maybe that's why it matters so much. We sat in silence, her hand resting lightly against mine, the world outside shrinking until it was just the two of us breathing in the same rhythm. I remember how strange it felt, to not want more, to not chase it further. Just the touch, just the presence, was enough. Looking back now, I see it wasn't really about romance. It was about recognition. Two people who didn't fit in each other's worlds, yet found a piece of themselves reflected where they least expected it. For her, it was a chance to be fragile without breaking. She had carried so much: loss, regret, a marriage hollowed out by silence, and she'd worn strength like armor. But in those moments with me, she didn't have to perform. She could just exist, tired and unfinished and human. For me, it was different. I had spent years trying to prove myself, to grow into something solid in a life that often felt small. But she saw me without the posturing. She saw me in the pauses, in the things I didn't say, in the steadiness I didn't realize I had until she leaned into it. And being seen like that, it changed me. We never called it love. Maybe that was the point. Love, in the way most people mean it, would have demanded more than either of us could give. What we had was quieter, something that lived between words and glances, something that didn't need to last forever to matter. And it did matter. I can't tell you where she is now. We didn't make promises. We didn't build a future. We gave each other something smaller, but no less important, a place to rest in the middle of a storm. A reminder that connection doesn't have to be tidy to be real. Sometimes I still catch myself standing in the shop late at night, the smell of oil and rain in the air, and I think about the way she whispered, "I can't keep pretending." I remember how her hand felt against mine, not urgent, not desperate, just there, steady. That's the moment I carry with me. Not the goodbye, not the uncertainty afterward. Just that quiet, impossible collapse into honesty. And if you've ever had someone like that, someone who saw you when you didn't even know you wanted to be seen, then you know why I'm telling this story. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?